governance of Gaza at the end of the conflict, there can't be a role for a terrorist organization. Hamas has long been a terrorist organization. They have the blood of innocent civilians, both Israeli and Palestinian, on their hands. And so when you look at the post-conflict governance of Gaza, we do see, as we've made clear, we want to see the Palestinian Authority governing a unified Gaza and the West Bank, but no, we do not support a role for Hamas.
Blinken is set to speak with Wang Yi in Laos. Will he raise this, and what's your evaluation of China's role in these talks? Is it helpful in trying to reach a ceasefire deal?
So I don't have any, as I said, I don't want to pass judgment on this declaration that came out today beyond what I just said, because we haven't reviewed the full text. I want us to be able to look at it and give a more thoughtful response, which of course we will do. But when it comes to China's role, I think, as you know, the Secretary has talked to Wang Yi a number of times about playing a constructive role in Middle East diplomacy since the outbreak of the conflict. He called Wang Yi from Saudi Arabia on our very first trip to the Middle East just a week after October 7th, and he's spoke to him on the phone a number of times and spoke to him when we've had the occasion to travel to China and when Wang Yi has had the occasion to travel here. And what we have generally encouraged China to do is to use their influence with countries in the region, especially countries with whom they have a relationship with where we don't, to discourage any escalation in the conflict. So, for example, Iran, which has continues to finance and support proxies that have launched attacks on Israel, or in the case of the Houthis, have launched attacks on commercial shipping. We have used China to use its influence to try to bring those attacks to an end, and will continue to do that.
And then Israel's foreign minister said that instead of rejecting terrorism, Abbas embraces murderers and rapists of Hamas. Are you concerned that this could complicate reaching a ceasefire deal, this response from Israel?
We don't think that anything related to this declaration should in any way have an impact on the ongoing discussions to reach a ceasefire. As you've heard us say, we think it's an agreement is in sight. We think it's achievable. It doesn't mean we'll get there, but we have made progress in the talks. And no, I don't think either this announcement or the reaction to it should play a role in making making a conclusion of those talks more difficult.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks. Just on what Daphne just asked. So you're saying that it doesn't matter whether Hamas actually has a unity government with this, let's say, Fatah and the other groups and so on, and basically announce that they adhere to the principles enunciated by this group, by the PLO and so on. So they have no role to play whatsoever?
So, Saeed, they have not announced that they accept the principles of the PLO. That is an important point that you make. Hamas has not renounced terrorism. It has not renounced the use of violence to achieve its political aims. It has not renounced the destruction of the state of Israel, something the PLO has done. It remains a terrorist organization. It remains committed to killing civilians. It remains committed to bringing about the destruction of the state of Israel. So no, we do not see an organization that believes in those tactics and believes in carrying out terrorism as a suitable organization to govern the Palestinian people.
Okay, so in fact, in their statements and so on, and their discussions and their interviews, and we have seen their spokesmen engage on Arab satellite TV all the time, and they actually say that they will go along with the principles of the PLO. They accept the two-state solution. They accept whatever agreement that can come about. They are focused on the ceasefire, and achieving a ceasefire. You don't think there is anything positive in these gestures? The fact that they most recently spoke about a two-state solution as a solution to the conflict.
They have not in any way committed to a two-state solution. And I just make clear, they could have, in the context of this declaration today, signed on to the principles of the PLO, and they did not. So maybe a spokesman makes statements from time to time, but Hamas as an organization has not renounced its support for violence, its support for terrorism, or its commitment to the destruction of the state of Israel, and that's an important point.
So, just, I don't want to belabor the issue, but, looking at how much influence Hamas has had in Gaza over the past, for a very, very long time, 17, 18 years and so on, and do you see a situation where they actually can be, completely taken out, or can be decapitated, as the Israelis just use the Israeli term and so on, from the political scene. I mean, they are embedded in the society itself.
So a few things about that. As you heard us say before, we of course believe that Israel can achieve military aims when it comes to the defeat of Hamas, but that is different, as you make clear in your question, to political aims. And we think that ultimately the best way to ensure that Hamas does not regain strength and reassert its position inside Gaza is to offer a different political path forward for the Palestinian people. And that's what we are committed to doing. That's what we have been trying to work on with all of our partners in the region. But I do think that there's another point that deserves to be made here, Saeed, which is the Palestinian people in Gaza ought to have a say in this as well. They ought to have the foremost say in choosing who their leaders are. And I obviously can't speak for the Palestinian people, but if you look at the death and destruction that Hamas's decision to launch the attacks of October 7th has brought on Gaza, there's no one that has brought more pain and suffering to the people in Gaza than Hamas, through their decisions first to launch the attacks of October 7th, and then their ongoing decision, which continues today, to hide among civilian communities and use civilians as human shields. So that's ultimately something that the Palestinian people have to speak to and speak to through their representatives. But I will say on behalf of the United States, we do not see it in any way as acceptable for a terrorist organization to play a role in governance, because you would see what you have always seen from Hamas, which is attacks on civilians, terrorism, and a further continuation of the conflict that has plagued the people of Israel and Palestinians for decades.
Well, I agree 100% with you that the final say ought to be for the Palestinian people and nobody else. I agree with you with that. Let me ask you about prospects for the ceasefire. Are you inclined to believe that the Israeli Prime Minister may surprise everybody and announce that he agrees to the terms of the ceasefire? What is your reading of what's going on? Because, we are probably at the point where every little detail has been discussed, every iota or every I has been dotted and every T is crossed and so on.
So I don't know what the Prime Minister will say either in his speech to Congress or in any of his other public remarks. I'll leave that to him. But the discussions continue, and there are a number of issues at play that we're still working to reach conclusion on that we have not yet reached conclusion.
My final question is on, there was a report that Israel bombed attentive journalists. I wonder if you know about this report. And, of course, there's been something like 160 Palestinian journalists that have been killed thus far. Why is there no outrage on the fate of journalists in Gaza?
So I think there's a great deal of outrage about the deaths of journalists. You have heard us speak to this, not just me, but the Secretary has spoken to this a number of times and made clear the importance we place on the work that journalists do in conflict zones around the world, and of course especially in Gaza, where we, in many cases, the world only knows about what's happening inside Gaza because journalists who risk their lives, put their lives on the line to bring us the news, are there every day reporting it. And so we mourn the death of any journalist just as we mourn the death of any civilian. And it is why, again, we are working so hard to try to reach a ceasefire. It's why the President has put his own political muscle behind this. It's why the Secretary has worked on it. It's why others in the administration have worked on it, because we believe ultimately the only way to stop the suffering of civilians, all civilians in Gaza, journalists, others who, other aid workers, others who do important work, as well as just people trying to go about their lives. The only way to alleviate that suffering in the daily death toll is to reach a ceasefire.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Republicans are criticizing Vice President Harris for not attending or not planning to attend Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech to a joint meeting of Congress tomorrow. She'll be campaigning in the Midwest, but Republicans say she's boycotting the speech. Of course, there's also no public meeting right now between Secretary Blinken and Netanyahu. Can you say if this is a boycott or if there are any concerns on behalf of the administration about the optics of meeting with Netanyahu publicly?
So Republicans are going to say what Republicans are going to say. I don't spend much time worrying about that, nor do I spend much time worried about optics. They're worried about substance and reality. And the reality is the vice president's office has made clear that she had a pre-scheduled trip before the prime minister announced this date, which is a date he decided in consultation with Congress, not with the administration. So she had pre-announced travel. And I would just ask, what is more important, being there for a speech or meeting with the prime minister and talking about how we can work together to address our concerns? I would posit that a meeting is more important.
Have Israeli officials reached out with any concerns? This is the first time that this happened, the vice president not attending a speech before a joint meeting of Congress in over 3 decades, I believe.
Not that I'm aware of.
Just mention, will there be any meetings with other members of the delegation that will come with Netanyahu? I don't know who's accompanying him, but let's say at the State Department.
I don't have anything to announce, but typically when you have a head of state or head of government meeting to the United States, there are always meetings that happen on the sidelines of that visit, and I would expect that to be the case here. Yeah.
Thank you, Matt. Switching to topic, can you give us a sense of where things stand in terms of implementation of the Repo Act after yesterday's presidential memorandum, which passes some of the authorities to the Secretary of State? And
yeah, we are working hard on it here at the State Department. There are other agencies, the Treasury Department, who have pieces that they have to implement as well. I don't have details to announce today, but we're working very hard to execute the details and execute the responsibilities delegated to us by the President.
Do you have a timetable?
No.
No,
as quickly as possible. There's important work we have to do, and we want to get that work done as quickly as possible. We want to get it right and be thorough.
Japan decided to pass $3 billion from proceeds from frozen Russian assets. Do you support that decision?
Of course we do.
Moving to Ukraine, Ukrainian foreign minister is in Beijing today. Do you hold any hope in terms of any behavior change when it comes to China's supporting Russia in Ukraine?
So I'm not going to make any assessments about what might happen or try to gauge expectations of what might happen, but I do think it's important that China hear directly from Ukraine about the toll that Ukraine has suffered through Russia's war of aggression, which we know China is doing a great deal to fuel through their support for reconstituting Russia's defense industrial base. We have always made clear that it is important that every country in the world recognize that in this conflict there's an aggressor and there's a victim. And we shouldn't treat the two parties as if they bear equal responsibility or as if this is some war that just magically popped out from nowhere without one side being responsible, and that when it comes to looking at how this war can end, it's important to remember those core principles. And so we have made that clear when we have engaged with China on the topic of the war in Ukraine. I know that other members of NATO and European countries have also made that clear to Russia, and we think it's important anytime that any country, and of course that includes China, hear directly from Ukraine.
Do you expect an engagement between the Secretary and Mr. Kuleba ahead of Secretary's own meeting with Chinese Foreign Minister?
Well, I do not believe that Ukraine is coming to ASEAN. They're not a member of ASEAN, so he does. I don't quite understand the question. He does speak with Foreign Minister Kuleba all the time, and of course that will continue.
Any call between?
I don't have any calls to announce today.
Final topic: Russian forces conducting second nuclear missile launcher drills in less than 2 months. What do you think they are doing there, and what is your reaction?
I don't have any assessment from here. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. One on Sudan. You just released a statement on the talks that will be held in Switzerland next month. Why did the U.S. move the talks from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, to Switzerland? And what do you expect from these talks?
So first of all, I wouldn't frame it as the United States. These are talks that we hope will take place that will be co-hosted by the United States, the government of Switzerland, and Saudi Arabia. And the goal of these talks is to build on the work that has already taken place in Jeddah and to try to move them to the next phase. We continue to believe there is no military solution to the conflict in Sudan, and we believe that convening these national ceasefire talks and making clear that they are backed by key international stakeholders is the only way to end the conflict in Sudan, to prevent the famine that exists there now from spreading, and to create space to restore the civilian political process. So we hope that the SAF and RSF will accept this invitation that we've extended to them. And as I said, it is not just from us, it's from the government of Switzerland, the government of Saudi Arabia, and I would note that these talks, should they go forward, will be joined by observers from the African Union, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and the United Nations.
Did you receive any response from the Sudanese
The
parties?
invitation just went today, so we have not yet, but we're certainly hopeful that they will accept. We think it's important that they use this opportunity to negotiate a ceasefire, to stop this horrific conflict and help ensure humanitarian access gets to the Sudanese people who need it.
And on Iran, the Iranian president has said today that Iran stands ready for all negotiations on nuclear program. What's your reaction?
So we have long made clear that we support diplomacy. We see that as the chief route to dealing with Iran's nuclear program. But we're a long way from that right now, especially when you see the steps that Iran has taken to flagrantly flout the requirements of the IAEA. And so we would hope that as a first step, Iran would come back in compliance with the demands of the IAEA that they have been, as I said, flouting here to date.
Does it mean
Sorry, go ahead, Michelle.
that you're not ready for talks with the new president?
So let me back up and say, while we certainly saw the comments from the new president, I do think it is important to remember that ultimately these decisions are decisions that are made by the supreme leader, and we have not made any assessment that Iran is yet changing its overall strategic approach to these issues.
And finally, on this, that means you're waiting to hear from from Khamenei, not from the president.
I don't have anything to add beyond what I just said on that. So.
Thanks.
Sorry, just to follow up on Sudan. The Jeddah talks have been unsuccessful so far. What makes you think that this format will be more successful in reaching a deal?
So the way to answer that is, I can't give you any assessment on the likelihood of a deal, but we just want to get the parties back to the table. And what we determined is that bringing the parties, the three host nations, and the observers together is the best shot that we have right now at getting a nationwide cessation of violence and getting a ceasefire that would allow humanitarian actors to surge humanitarian assistance in and get back to this place where we can find a mechanism to restore the democratic transition that Sudan was on. And so